The largest palatial settlement on Crete is the site of Knossos. The central precinct alone probably had 10,000 inhabitants, and if we're looking at the broader area around the site, in the metropolitan area, we're probably talking 30 to 40,000 people. And the excavations at Knossos have been going on since Arthur Evans began work here in the 1880s. So there's been ongoing excavations here that have revealed an incredibly elaborate palace. The palace served as a large communal hall for festivals. It's built around a central courtyard, which you can kind of see in the aerial photograph here. And then this is a photo of visitors at the central courtyard itself. And surrounding that courtyard were a series of administrative rooms, production areas for things like pottery, bronze, gold, and stone vessels, and an elaborate network of small rectangular storage rooms that Arthur Evans argued was the basis for the labyrinth myth. If you remember, you think back to Greek mythology, the Minoan king Minos, right, which is why this is called the Minoan civilization, had a labyrinth where he kept the Minotaur underneath the palace at Knossos. And so this the interpretation here is that this elaborate network of storage facilities that is incredibly difficult to navigate was the foundation for that etymological myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth at Knossos. But it's in those areas that we see the extensive storage of goods. Now, not only do we have an administrative and productive center, we have a large ritual and focus on religious emphasis on bringing people together within the palace. And so the palace itself becomes the focus of ritual, religious, and political power. So the warehouses, we can kind of look at this, is full of these large pithoi and ceramic storage jars that are found throughout the site, and the agricultural production centered around cereals, grapes, and olives. And we've talked about this before, right? Olive oil is this highly prized trade commodity, and it likely fueled the growth of the Minoan state. Now we can see a couple of destruction levels that were found within the excavations at Knossos. One in 1700 BCE that was likely caused by an earthquake, and then again in 1450, and that fully kind of marks the end of the Minoan period and the beginning of the Mycenaean period. Now there's still a lot of debate on whether or not that 1450 BCE was a hostile takeover or a conquest by the Mycenaeans over the Minoans, but what is clear is that after 1450, the site itself shows a strong Mycenaean influence. Now the palatial architecture itself is really kind of fascinating, right? So we can kind of think about the main entrance into the compound, right? Either through the south entrance, where you would come through a series of corridors into the central courtyard, or through the north entrance. And this is where you would probably be most of the public entrance, because you come through a large colonnaded hall and through a series of highly decorated fresco rooms into the central courtyard. And this is the kind of think about the article that Thaler wrote. Palaces for the Mycenaeans and Minoans are tightly controlled spaces. They are presentations for the public, but they're also meant to restrict access to certain areas. So we have this kind of multi-story palace. It's built around this large central courtyard for public festivals. And as people come into the public courtyard, through these kinds of hallways and corridors, they're met with images that reinforce the power of the elite. So the Prince of the Lilies here, which is one of these most famous frescoes at Knossos, is meant to imply, Arthur Evans argued that this was the priest king, control over nature and its representation through this. And we have the jumping of the bull fresco, and that's an important kind of iconographic representation of power. Bulls in particular are represented everywhere. The other really cool thing about Knossos is it's built with baths and a water collection and drainage facilities. There's an extensive sewer that runs under this palace and most of the administrative center. So we can see the intricate planning that went out in building this central location. We also have a functional differentiation between the living quarters, the administrative centers, the production areas, and the storage locations. So everything here is planned out. We can kind of think about this as different entrances. On the east entrance is likely the entrance for our production facilities. On the west entrance is the entrance for storage. And we can kind of see coming through into the kind of small central courtyard access to a series of temples and the throne rooms within the compound itself. So it's very much meant to exclude individuals in society through rituals of inclusion, that is, feasting and activities that were going on inside of the palace architecture. So religious rituals and feasts are conducted inside the central courtyards, and we can see the reconstruction of feasting activities on these frescoes that are built onto the walls and into kind of burial chambers. There's a throne room, multiple throne rooms actually in the palace, but the throne room that Evans identified covers griffins sitting among the weeds in brightly colored frescoes, and in the center of it is a hearth or a basin, was likely to suggest ritual libations. People would come in through this after the feast and probably pour out wine or offer foods into a fire as the king sat and watched people proceed through this. Now we also have this large-scale storage facilities, that labyrinth-like institution over here, and the state-sponsored production of gold work, bronze, pottery, stonework, seals, and beadwork within the palace itself. So there's a lot of activities that are going on here. So this functions as the central administrative center. All of those goods and resources from the surrounding communities are flowing into the palace, where they are then made into other goods and then redistributed out through a series of networks of feasts and ration distributions.